My own son sat there grinning, waiting for the lawyer to say I'd get nothing from my ex-wife's $34 million estate. I could feel every eye in that room on me like I was already buried with her money. But when the lawyer cleared his throat and read one single line, that grin vanished. You could have heard the clock tick in that downtown office. They thought the old man was done for, but the real story hadn't even started. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because you'll want to see what happened next. The call came while I was fixing the sprinkler in the front yard, the kind of small job that keeps a man feeling useful. The afternoon sun was heavy on my back when the phone started buzzing in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my jeans, thinking it was a neighbor or one of the church brothers checking in. But when I heard that voice, formal, smooth, careful, I knew it wasn't anyone from my side of town. Mr. Walker. This is attorney Cole Henderson. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Your ex-wife, Mrs. Ruth Walker, passed away last night. For a second I didn't move. The sound of water spraying from the cracked sprinkler head faded into the distance. The words didn't register, not at first. Ruth dead. That woman had always been larger than life, too full of command and certainty to just stop breathing. I lowered myself onto the grass, feeling the heat of it through my jeans, and stared at the old oak tree by the porch. Its leaves barely stirred, like the world itself was holding its breath. Cole kept talking, saying something about arrangements, the will, legal procedures, but his voice was underwater. I hung up without meaning to. My fingers were trembling, though not from age. I walked back into the house, the one we'd bought before everything fell apart, and set the phone down on the kitchen counter. The place smelled like coffee and dust. My coffee mug still sat by the window, half full, a dark ring circling the inside, like time refusing to move on. For years I'd told myself I didn't miss her, that what we had was over and done, two different lives that had once shared a road and now ran in opposite directions. But that lie crumbled the moment I heard her name in past tense. Ruth and I met in a church basement on the south side of Atlanta, back when I still had a full head of hair and a heart full of plans. She sang in the choir, the kind of voice that made folks stop talking mid-conversation. She could turn a verse from Psalms into a hymn that made even the hardest men wipe their eyes. We built a life from scratch, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. We never had much, but we had faith. And for a long time that was enough. I still remember her handwriting on the notes she'd leave by the coffee pot, "Isaiah, don't forget to pray before you start your day." We had our fights, sure, money time, the kind of things that eat at a marriage, but she always circled back, always said, "We'll get through this." Until one day she didn't. The success came fast after that, her real estate business, the magazine articles, the awards. She stopped coming to Sunday service, said she'd pray in her own way. She started dressing like she'd already left this world for a better one. Pearls, tailored suits, the kind of perfume that costs more than a week's groceries. And our son Marcus followed her like a shadow, learning how to walk. I used to joke that the boy got her stubborn streak and my nose. But the truth is, he got more than that. He got her hunger. I sat down in my old recliner, the one Ruth used to tease me about for being the ugliest thing in the house. I stared at the ceiling fan turning lazy circles above me and wondered when exactly she stopped loving me, or if she ever really did. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock that had belonged to my grandmother. Funny how time feels different when someone dies. It stretches out thin and endless, like it's daring you to fill it with meaning. The next morning I found myself standing in front of the mirror, razor in hand, staring at a man I barely recognized. Lines where laughter used to be. Eyes that had seen too much loss to pretend anymore. I thought about calling Marcus, but I knew what I'd hear. He'd sound polite, detached, like he was talking to a stranger. Ever since Ruth made him partner in her company, he'd spoken to me like a charity case. The last time we talked, he said, "Dad, you wouldn't understand how the world works now." Maybe he was right. Or maybe the world he knew had forgotten how to respect the ones who built it. By noon, the lawyer called again. "Mr. Walker, we'll be reading Mrs. Walker's will this Friday at 10. Her son requested your presence." His tone held that word, her son, not yours. I almost laughed. The irony was bitter in my throat. After years of being pushed aside, I was being summoned back into her world, not as a husband, not as a father, but as a name on a list. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain came down hard, beating the roof like a restless drumline. I sat by the window watching water slide down the glass, and remembered Ruth in her prime, her laugh at the church picnic, her head tilted back under the summer sun, the smell of peach cobbler cooling on the counter. There was warmth once before ambition swallowed it whole. I wondered if she ever thought of me in her last moments, or if she'd already filed me away with the rest of her old life. Morning came slow. I brewed coffee black and strong the way she used to make it. My hand steadied as I poured it into my chipped mug. The bitterness grounded me, pulled me back from that hollow place where grief and pride wrestle. I decided I would go to that will reading, not because I wanted her money, but because I needed to look Marcus in the eye. I needed him to see that his father was still standing. When Friday came, the sky was pale and heavy with the kind of clouds that promise thunder but never deliver. I put on my one good suit, the dark gray one Ruth had picked out for Easter 5 years before we split. It still fit, though the shoulders had grown tired. As I drove downtown, I passed the church. The doors were open and a gospel hymn spilled out onto the street. I almost stopped, almost went in to sit under that stained glass light one more time. But I kept driving. There were ghosts enough waiting for me already. When I walked into the law office, Marcus was already there sitting beside 2 men in polished suits. He didn't look up, didn't even nod, just scrolled his phone like the world owed him its attention. I stood by the door, my hands folded behind my back, and waited for the lawyer to speak. I didn't know what Ruth had planned. Maybe nothing. Maybe she'd left me a photograph and her blessing to move on. But deep down, somewhere between my ribs and my faith, I felt that this wasn't just a will. It was a reckoning. And what happened next would burn through every secret she left behind. I still remember the first time I saw Ruth like it was yesterday. It was a warm evening in the summer of '82, and our church was hosting its annual charity dinner in the fellowship hall. The kind with folding tables lined with sweet tea pitchers, fried chicken, and banana pudding, brought by the ladies who took their recipes as seriously as their faith. I was helping Brother Lewis set up the sound system when she walked in wearing a yellow dress that caught the light like sunrise through stained glass. She was laughing with one of the deacons, quoting scripture about strength and purpose, and the whole room seemed to turn toward her without even meaning to. She had that kind of presence like joy itself had found a voice. I didn't talk to her right away. I just stood there pretending to fix the microphone while watching her greet everyone like she'd known them her whole life. Later that night, she sat down beside me during dessert. "You're quiet," she said. "That's dangerous in a church crowd. They'll think you're plotting something holy." I laughed, and that laugh became the first of 1,000 we'd share. We started courting the way folks did back then, slow, respectful, with Sunday dinners and long walks after choir rehearsal. I'd drive her home in my old Ford pickup, and she'd always say, "Don't walk me all the way to the door, Isaiah. Let my mama think I'm still a lady." But she'd smile and linger just long enough that I knew she didn't want me to leave. We built our love like we built our faith through patience, prayer, and hard work. When we finally got married, it wasn't fancy. The ceremony was small, held right there at Mount Zion Baptist. I remember the choir singing "Great is Thy Faithfulness," and Ruth's veil trembling as she tried not to cry. We didn't have much, just an apartment on the west side with second-hand furniture and a hand-me-down fridge that hummed like it was alive. But every night she'd put gospel records on the turntable, and we'd dance barefoot on that linoleum floor like it was a ballroom. Ruth was the heart of our home. She could make a Sunday dinner feel like a holiday, and a holiday feel like heaven. Every Friday, the smell of her collard greens and cornbread filled the house. The neighbors would find excuses to drop by just to say hi, but really they came for her cooking and her stories. She had this way of turning pain into parables. If someone wronged her, she'd just shake her head and say, "The Lord don't need my help teaching lessons." When Marcus was born, everything changed. I'd never seen her so radiant. She held him like he was the promise she'd prayed for. We couldn't stop smiling. Every night before bed, we'd kneel beside his crib, holding hands, and pray over him. Lord, she'd whisper, make him kind, make him strong, and let him never forget where he came from. Sometimes I wonder if God listened to only half that prayer. Those early years were beautiful in their simplicity. We didn't have vacations or big bank accounts, but we had joy. Sunday mornings were sacred. Ruth in her white hat, Marcus in his little suit, and me ushering at the door, greeting folks with a handshake and a smile. After service, we'd go to Sister Palmer's for potluck, where the kids ran barefoot through the yard, while the grown folks argued about which pastor preached the longest. Life was loud, messy, and good. Then came the day Ruth decided she wanted more. She was ambitious, and I admired that about her. She said she was tired of watching other people buy the houses she cleaned. If they can do it, so can I. And she did. She took real estate classes at night while I worked double shifts wiring new homes. She had a head for business and a voice that could sell rain to the desert. Within a few years, she had her own agency and her own office downtown. I was proud of her, Lord, I was. But success changes the air around people. It makes them walk a little faster, talk a little sharper. Our dinners got quieter. The phone rang more, and when it didn't, she was answering emails. Marcus started spending more time with her at the office, learning her world instead of mine. He'd come home in polished shoes, talking about investments and opportunities, words that didn't fit right in our living room. I'd sit at the table, listening, smiling, but feeling the distance grow like a shadow stretching across the floor. Still, I loved her. Even when she forgot to say grace. Even when she started skipping Sunday service. I'd wake early and sit on the porch with my coffee, waiting for her to join me the way she used to. But she was always gone before sunrise, networking breakfasts, client meetings, charity events. The same church that once filled her heart became just another stop for donations. One night she came home late, the smell of perfume and exhaustion heavy in the air. Isaiah, she said, we've built different kinds of lives. That's not a bad thing. I nodded, though I didn't understand. I thought love was supposed to be one kind of life shared between two people. But she smiled, that practice smile, the one she wore in photographs, and kissed my cheek like I was a memory she couldn't quite forget. Years later, when we finally signed the divorce papers, she said, I hope you find peace. I told her I already have. I just wish you could too. We walked out of that courthouse as strangers, wearing old wedding rings. Now, sitting alone after that phone call, I could still hear her laugh echoing through the church hall, see that yellow dress swaying to the rhythm of her voice. I missed the woman who used to pray with me, not the one who built an empire. Somewhere along the line, she traded faith for fortune, and I let her. Maybe I thought she'd circle back one day. The sprinkler outside had stopped sputtering, and the yard was quiet again. The sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the porch. I thought about the lawyer's invitation to the will reading, about Marcus sitting there probably thinking he already knew how the story ended. But Ruth never did anything halfway. If she'd left something behind, it wouldn't be simple. Not her. I stood up, poured myself a glass of sweet tea, and looked out over the yard we'd planted together, the dogwood tree she loved still standing tall. There was a storm coming, I could feel it in the air. And deep down I knew it wasn't just in the weather. Whatever Ruth had written in that will, it wasn't just about money. It was her last sermon. And I was about to find out what lesson she'd been saving all these years. It happened so quietly I almost didn't notice it at first, the shift from the woman who used to hum gospel tunes while folding laundry to the one who spoke in clipped business phrases even at the dinner table. Ruth's real estate firm took off faster than either of us imagined. Her face started showing up on billboards and glossy flyers around town, smiling beside lines that said, "Building dreams one home at a time." Folks from church bragged about her like she was family. I was proud too, at least in the beginning. But pride can turn heavy when it no longer has a place to rest. I still remember the first time she missed Sunday service, said she had a client brunch. Then it was a networking conference, then a weekend seminar in Dallas. Soon she wasn't missing just Sundays. She was missing home. Our house started to feel like a showroom, polished, perfect, and empty. I'd come in after a long day wiring new homes, boots caked with dust, hands calloused, and find her sitting at the kitchen island laptop, open Bluetooth in her ear, her voice smooth and professional. Isaiah. Could you not make so much noise? I'm on a call. She used to light up when she saw me walk through the door. Now she barely looked up. I'd stand there, the smell of copper and sawdust still clinging to me, and realize she didn't see me anymore. I was part of the furniture, the dependable thing that never changed, never asked for more. Marcus noticed it too, though he'd never admit it. He started dressing sharper, mimicking her style. Little suits, shiny shoes, talking about presentation and first impressions. One night I caught him in the garage rehearsing how to shake hands. Son, I told him, a man's worth isn't in how firm he grips, but how steady he stands. He nodded, but I could see he wasn't listening. His world was tilting toward hers. When Ruth's firm opened its second branch, she hosted a celebration dinner at some new steakhouse downtown. The kind of place where the lighting's dim enough to hide the prices. I went because she asked me to, though I felt out of place from the moment I walked in. Everyone was talking about market trends and quarterly goals, words that made my head ache. Ruth sat at the head of the table, radiant under the low light, laughing with her investors. When she introduced me, she said, "This is Isaiah, my ex-husband." The word hit like a slap. We were still married then. But in her mind, she'd already moved on. The drive home that night was quiet. She stared out the window while I gripped the steering wheel, trying to find something to say. "You've come a long way," I managed. She smiled, that polite smile she used for clients. "Yes, and I'm not done yet." After that, we spoke less and less. She started staying in hotels even when she didn't have to, said it was easier for early meetings. I started finding her perfume on the guest towels, her earrings on the nightstand. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning lazy circles and think about the woman who used to dance barefoot in our kitchen. I'd wonder when she stopped believing that simple things could still be enough. At church, people stopped asking about her. They'd just give me those pitying looks, the kind folks reserve for widowers and fools. I kept showing up anyway, sitting in the same pew singing the same hymns even when my voice cracked. Brother Lewis once pulled me aside and said, "Isaiah, sometimes the Lord lets a storm blow through just to see if your foundation holds." I nodded, but deep down I already knew this storm wasn't passing. Then came the night she didn't come home at all. I waited up till 2, pacing the living room, the clock ticking louder than my heartbeat. When she finally walked in, she smelled like champagne and rain. "Don't wait up next time," she said, slipping off her heels without looking at me. I asked her if there was someone else. She didn't answer, just walked past me into the dark hallway. Silence said more than she ever could. Marcus was 16 by then, caught in the middle but too proud to show it. He started avoiding me, siding with her even when she wasn't around. Once when I told him to mow the lawn, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "That's not my job anymore." That anymore stung worse than the disrespect itself. It meant the house that once belonged to all of us was now just mine, and maybe not even that for long. I kept working, kept fixing what was broken because that's what I knew how to do. I repaired things other men would have thrown away: washing machines, screen doors, a marriage hanging by threads. But there are some cracks that glue can't touch. The day Ruth finally left, she didn't slam the door. She just closed it softly, like she was afraid of waking a sleeping child. I found a note on the counter. It said, "You're a good man, Isaiah, but I can't live small anymore." I sat there for hours, the house too quiet, the coffee gone cold. "Small," she'd said. I didn't know love had a size. After she left, Marcus stayed with her most nights. He'd visit occasionally, drop by in a new car, talk about his business classes and how Mom's teaching me the ropes. He spoke like I was some relic from another time, something to be tolerated. I listened, smiled, and said, "That's good, son. Learn all you can." But the truth was, every word widened the gap. Sometimes I'd drive by her office downtown. Her name was etched in gold on the glass, Ruth Walker and Associates. Inside, I could see her moving between desks, commanding the room like a general. I'd sit in my truck a few minutes watching, then drive off before she saw me. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the distance between us or the fact that she didn't seem to notice it anymore. Years passed like that. The house aged faster than I did, paint peeling, porch sagging, but I kept it up as best I could. Every spring I'd plant flowers along the walkway, azaleas her favorite. They bloomed bright and full like they didn't know they were growing from heartbreak. When I got the call about her death, part of me didn't believe it because I'd already buried her a long time ago. The woman I loved had disappeared behind success, behind pride, behind walls I could never climb. And now she was truly gone. As I sat there that day thinking of the will reading, I couldn't shake one thought from my mind. Ruth never did anything without purpose. If she'd left me out of her life for so long, what reason could she possibly have to bring me back in through her death? Whatever it was, I had a feeling it wasn't mercy. It was a message, and the only way to hear it was to walk right into the storm she left behind. The first time Marcus called me old-fashioned, I laughed. Thought it was just the kind of thing kids said when they were trying to sound grown. He was 17 then, tall, confident, wearing a suit that didn't fit quite right but already carried himself like a man who believed the world owed him space. I had just come home from a long day on a job site, dust still clinging to my boots, and found him sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone. When I asked if he was coming to choir rehearsal, he didn't even look up. "Dad, nobody my age still does that. It's old-fashioned." The word stung in a way I didn't expect. I wanted to tell him that faith never goes out of style. That character doesn't expire with the years, but the look in his eyes told me he wouldn't hear it. From that moment, something small but sharp began to wedge itself between us. He started spending his weekends downtown at business mixers Ruth hosted, shaking hands with people who spoke in clipped tones and smiled without showing their teeth. When I'd ask him about school, he'd give me short answers, distracted like talking to me was a chore. "It's fine, Dad. You wouldn't understand." Those words followed me like a ghost. He had inherited Ruth's hunger, the same restless fire that once made me admire her. But in him it burned colder. He was ambitious without compassion, confident without humility. I'd watch him talk about deals and profits, and all I could see was the boy who used to run barefoot through the yard chasing fireflies, laughing like the world had no edge. That boy was gone, traded away for a suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. Ruth encouraged it, of course. "He's got vision," she'd say when I tried to bring it up. "You should be proud, Isaiah." I was proud, but pride and peace don't always share the same room. Every time I saw them together, heads bent over her laptop, whispering about investments, I felt like the ghost of a man still living in his own house. One Sunday I asked Marcus to come with me to church. He hesitated, then said, "Mom says I should spend my time networking. Church won't build my future." I looked at him, trying to find a trace of the boy I'd raised, but all I saw was Ruth's reflection staring back at me. "Son," I said quietly, "church doesn't build your future. It keeps it from falling apart." He just smiled, that tight, polite smile Ruth used to wear when she thought I didn't understand her world. Our last Christmas together before the divorce was the moment I realized I'd lost him completely. Ruth hosted a dinner at her new house, bigger, shinier, colder than the one we'd built together. The place was filled with her clients and their families, people who spoke like they'd been born successful. I brought a homemade pecan pie the way my mother used to make it and set it on the dessert table. Marcus glanced at it and chuckled under his breath. "You still do that old Southern stuff, huh, Dad?" His tone wasn't curious, it was condescending. That laugh did something to me. It hollowed out a part of my chest that had been holding on. I didn't eat a single bite that night. After Ruth and I separated, Marcus stopped calling altogether. I'd text him once a week, short messages, nothing demanding. "How's work? You doing all right?" Most went unanswered. When he did reply, it was with single words. "Good. Busy. Fine." It was strange how a three-letter word could feel heavier than silence. I started hearing about him through other people. A friend from church mentioned seeing him on a magazine cover, Atlanta's Rising Real Estate Heirs. I bought the issue. His photo was right there, perfect suit, confident grin, standing beside Ruth. In the article he said, "My mother taught me everything I know about success." No mention of his father. Not one word. I folded the magazine neatly, set it on the counter, and stared at it until the print started to blur. I tried not to be bitter. I told myself he was just young, caught up in the noise of achievement. But deep down, I knew it wasn't youth, it was pride. Pride is a poison that doesn't taste bitter until it's too late. I saw it in Ruth, and now I saw it blooming in him. One night I ran into him downtown by accident. I had just finished wiring a storefront when I saw him stepping out of a black SUV wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my month's wages. He spotted me, hesitated, then forced a smile. "Dad?" he said flatly, like he was acknowledging an old acquaintance. I nodded. "Marcus." The silence between us stretched thin. "You still working construction?" he asked finally. I nodded again. "Pays the bills." He gave a small laugh. "You should think about doing something more scalable." That word scalable rolled off his tongue like a foreign language I never wanted to learn. I wanted to tell him that what I built with my hands was honest, that every wire I laid, every beam I lifted stood because of effort, not manipulation. But I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, my son, my pride, my disappointment, and realized that sometimes blood isn't thicker than ego. That night I sat in my truck for a long time, engine idling, staring at the reflection of city lights on the windshield. I thought about calling Ruth, but what was there to say? She'd made her choice. They both had. I drove home to the small, quiet house that still smelled like coffee and pine cleaner, and for the first time in my life I didn't pray before bed. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering where exactly I'd gone wrong. Months passed. I kept working, kept showing up to church, kept pretending I didn't miss him. But every time I saw a father and son walking out of a diner or laughing at a gas station, something in me twisted. I'd think about all the things I'd taught him: how to change a tire, how to fish, how to treat people right, and how easily he'd traded them for Ruth's polished world. The last conversation we had before Ruth died was short. He called to tell me about another business deal, something about an expansion out west. I congratulated him. He paused, then said, "You ever think maybe you should have aimed higher?" "Dad," I remember my answer like it was carved into the air. "No, son." I aimed right where I wanted, to build something that lasted. He didn't understand. He never would. Now as I prepare to walk into that lawyer's office, I can already see the look on his face, the same smirk that used to flicker whenever he thought he'd outgrown me. He believes he's already won, that this final chapter belongs to him and his mother's legacy. But he doesn't know the whole story. Ruth was a complicated woman, but she never left a page unfinished. And if I know her at all, the ending she wrote for us wasn't one of pride or ambition. No, she was saving her sharpest lesson for last. And Marcus is about to learn it the hard way. The funeral looked more like a red carpet event than a homegoing. Black Cadillacs and German imports lined the church parking lot. Men in designer suits checking their watches. Women in wide hats, whispering behind manicured hands. I stood under the magnolia tree by the entrance, the same one Ruth and I used to park under after Sunday service. She'd laugh and say, "You always pick the shadiest spot." I never thought I'd be standing there years later watching strangers carry her casket like they were loading an investment portfolio instead of a woman's body. Inside the sanctuary smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. The choir sang, but their voices didn't reach me. I could hear them, but I couldn't feel them. Ruth's photograph rested on an easel near the altar, her smile frozen and flawless. They'd chosen a picture from her company's anniversary gala, the powerful Ruth Walker, not the Ruth who once fell asleep on the couch with biscuit dough on her hands. I walked down the aisle, every step echoing against the polished floor. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. It wasn't grief that filled the room. It was curiosity. The ex-husband had arrived. The man who didn't fit the brand of the empire Ruth left behind. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, as if I'd wandered into a place I didn't earn the right to enter. I took a seat in the second row, not front and center, not in the back, just close enough to see her face in that glossy frame. My hands rested on my knees, calloused and trembling, not from weakness but from restraint. The pastor began to speak, quoting verses about forgiveness, about how death humbles the proud. I almost laughed at the irony. Pride had built this whole show. When Marcus walked in, the air shifted. Cameras flashed. People whispered his name like he was royalty. He looked sharp, black suit, gold cufflinks, a watch that gleamed under the light. My son. My own blood walking like a stranger. He didn't even glance my way as he moved to the front row. The service moved in slow motion. Ruth's business partner spoke first, then her lawyer, then some city councilman she'd once supported. They praised her ambition, her vision, her leadership. Not one of them mentioned her laugh, her cooking, her love of old hymns. It was as if they'd buried the woman I knew long before the casket closed. When the pastor asked if anyone else wanted to share a few words, I stood. My heart thudded against my ribs. The room went still. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I stepped up to the pulpit, cleared my throat, and looked at her picture. Ruth Walker. I began softly, was many things. A mother, a businesswoman, a dreamer. But before all that, she was a girl in a yellow dress who believed in faith, family, and forgiveness. My voice cracked, but I held it together. We built something once, something simple, something real. And though the years changed her, I like to believe that somewhere inside she still remembered the sound of gospel on Sunday mornings. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people looked moved, others uncomfortable. But I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to her, to the memory of who she used to be. When I stepped down, Marcus stood abruptly. He turned to face me, his expression sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. My knees locked, but I didn't flinch. "This isn't your world anymore," he continued. "You left her behind. Don't act like you cared." The silence that followed was thick and choking. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The son I'd carried on my shoulders. The boy who once traced his fingers through my beard and called me a hero. And now he was standing over me like I was an intruder in my own story. I took a slow breath, steady as stone. I didn't come here for the world. I said, my voice calm but firm. I came to honor your mother. Something in the way I said it made the whispers stop. Even the choir fell silent. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. I could see the anger flicker in his eyes, but beneath it, just for a second, there was confusion. Maybe even guilt. The pastor cleared his throat, trying to smooth the tension, but the damage was done. The room had shifted. The air itself seemed to bend toward me, not in pity, but in quiet respect. I walked back to my seat, head high, hands steady. The choir resumed softer this time, their voices trembling like they'd seen something sacred. When the service ended, people avoided me like grief might rub off on their clothes. A few old church members came up to shake my hand, whispering kind words they didn't dare say louder. I thanked them. Outside, the sky had turned gray heavy with the promise of rain. I stood by the hearse as they loaded the casket. Marcus didn't look at me. He was busy shaking hands, posing for photos with Ruth's colleagues, every gesture rehearsed. As the cars began to pull away toward the cemetery, I stayed behind. I didn't need to see the burial. I'd already done my mourning years ago. I watched the procession disappear down the road until all that was left was the faint echo of engines fading into distance. I sat on the church steps for a while, letting the drizzle cool my face. The magnolia petals had started to fall, scattering across the walkway like bits of bone-white silk. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. I whispered a prayer, not for Ruth, but for Marcus. "Lord," I said quietly, "let him see before it's too late." Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Mr. Walker. The voice was crisp professional. This is Attorney Henderson. I believe it's important that you attend the reading of Mrs. Walker's will tomorrow morning. There are details you'll want to hear in person. My stomach tightened. Is Marcus aware? I asked. Yes, the lawyer said. He'll be there. A pause. But you may find the contents surprising. The line clicked dead. I sat there for a long moment, rain dripping from the brim of my hat, my hands clasped together. Surprising, he said. I looked up at the sky, the clouds dark as judgment, and felt something shift inside me, a mix of dread and anticipation. Ruth had always known how to make an exit, but this was her final curtain call, and she'd made damn sure I'd be sitting front row when the truth took the stage. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with that stillness that comes before a storm. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and sat in silence at the kitchen table. The old clock on the wall ticked slow, each sound stretching time like an elastic band that refused to snap. I didn't know what to expect from the will reading, but the lawyer's voice from the night before kept replaying in my mind. You may find the content surprising. Those words clung to me like humidity. By 9 I was dressed and ready, dark suit, polished shoes, tie knotted tight. I caught my reflection in the mirror before leaving and barely recognized the man staring back. My eyes looked sharper, older, but clearer too. There's a certain steadiness that comes when you've already lost everything once. The law firm sat in one of those glass towers downtown where you can't tell which floor the sky begins. I parked across the street watching people stream through the revolving doors. Some rushing, some gliding, all pretending time was theirs to control. When I finally walked in, the receptionist smiled that rehearsed smile. Money buys. Mr. Walker, they're expecting you. The conference room was too bright, too white, too polished. Marcus was already there, seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, his suit perfectly pressed, his jaw tight. He didn't look up when I walked in. To his left sat 2 of Ruth's board members, both of them wearing expressions that hovered between curiosity and discomfort. The lawyer, Cole Henderson, stood near the window, flipping through a thick folder. He greeted me politely, gesturing to a chair across from my son. I sat down. The chair creaked. No one spoke. The air conditioning hummed above us like a low, nervous breath. Cole cleared his throat. We're here to execute the last will and testament of Mrs. Ruth Walker. His tone was even professional, but I caught a glint in his eyes that suggested he knew this wouldn't be a simple affair. Mrs. Walker was meticulous about her estate. Every detail accounted for every word her own. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exuding confidence. He'd probably rehearsed this moment in his head, Ruth's empire officially becoming his inheritance. I could almost see the numbers flickering behind his eyes, already dividing, already planning. Cole began reading. To my son, Marcus Walker. I leave the family home on Lakeview Drive and the sum of $500,000 as a sign of gratitude for the ambition he inherited from me. The words hit the room like static. Marcus blinked, then frowned. His jaw twitched. $500,000. The family home. That was it. Before he could speak, Cole continued. To my former husband, Mr. Isaiah Walker, I leave full ownership and executive control of Walker Realty Group, along with the remaining $33.5 million in personal and company assets. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I didn't breathe. My mind went blank for a full 10 seconds. Surely I'd heard wrong. I glanced at the lawyer, at the pages in his hands, waiting for a correction. None came. Marcus's chair scraped violently against the floor as he shot to his feet. This has to be a mistake. His voice was sharp, rising. She wouldn't give him everything. Cole's eyes stayed calm behind his glasses. Mrs. Walker's wishes were written, signed, and notarized 3 months before her passing. I assure you, Mr. Walker, there is no mistake. Marcus's face turned red. He pointed at me like I'd stolen something from him. You manipulated her. You got in her head somehow. Sit down, Marcus. My voice was steady, but beneath it something inside me trembled. I wasn't angry, not even smug, just stunned. You know your mother. No one could tell her what to do. He laughed bitterly, pacing the length of the table. You think this means anything? You don't know how to run a company? You're an old man with a toolbox and nostalgia. Maybe, I said quietly, but I know how to build things from the ground up. That's something she never forgot. Cole spoke again. There's more. Marcus froze. The lawyer unfolded another page, this one handwritten in Ruth's elegant script. He read it aloud. My son Marcus has my fire, but his father has my faith. Isaiah believed in me when no one else did. He built this foundation long before I had a business card. To Marcus, I leave the home he grew up in, so he may remember where strength comes from. To Isaiah, I return the work of his own hands. The room felt smaller. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure if I wanted to cry or laugh or walk straight out into the street. All those years of silence, of distance, of being invisible, and she had seen me after all. Marcus sank into his chair, eyes glassy with disbelief. He wasn't used to losing, not to anyone, least of all me. This is insane, he muttered. She's punishing me. He stopped, his voice cracking. She never understood what it took to keep this family successful. Cole closed the folder. Mrs. Walker understood more than you think, Mr. Walker. She wrote one final note for both of you. He handed me a small envelope. My name was written on it in her familiar cursive, the same handwriting she used on birthday cards decades ago. I turned it over in my hand before opening it. Inside was a single sheet. Isaiah, it read, You always said peace was better than power. I finally understand that now. Use this to build something honest, and forgive me for forgetting what mattered most. There was another line beneath it, faint and shaky. Tell Marcus I love him. But some lessons can only be taught in absence. I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling. Across the table, Marcus stared at me, his face unreadable. For the first time he looked less like Ruth and more like the boy I once knew, the one who still believed his father could fix anything. I never wanted this, I said softly. Any of it. He didn't answer. He just stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out the door, slamming behind him so hard the walls seemed to shake. Cole exhaled slowly. She was a remarkable woman, he said, gathering the papers. She left a message only you could deliver. I nodded, staring out the window at the gray city below. Somewhere rain had started falling, streaking the glass like tears. I'd come to that room expecting closure, but Ruth had given me something else entirely, a second beginning wrapped in the ruins of everything we'd built. As I left the building, the rain soaked through my suit, but I didn't hurry. The sky rumbled low and distant, like a warning or a blessing. Maybe both. I thought about Marcus, about the home on Lakeview Drive, about the empire Ruth had placed in my reluctant hands, and for the first time in years I whispered her name, not with bitterness, but with something that sounded almost like forgiveness. Because deep down I knew Ruth wasn't finished speaking. She never was. And whatever lesson she meant to teach, this was only the beginning. Cole waited until the room had gone completely still before he unfolded the last page. His tone softened, losing its courtroom precision. This, he said quietly, is Mrs. Walker's personal letter, written in her own hand and addressed to you both. The air in the office changed. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade away. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he began to read. My dear Isaiah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never stopped loving you. You taught me faith and you taught me decency. I forgot those things when I started chasing success. I thought power could protect me, but all it did was build walls between the people who mattered most. You were right, peace is the only real wealth. I was too proud to say it while I was alive, But you were the best man I ever knew." The words hit like a slow wave washing over me until I could barely breathe. For a long moment I couldn't look at anyone. The years between us, all that distance and silence, collapsed into one unbearable truth she hadn't forgotten. All this time, while I thought she'd moved on, she had been watching from across that invisible gulf we built together, remembering the man who used to hold her when life was still simple. Cole's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "To my son Marcus, you have my ambition, but your father's heart beats in you whether you see it or not. You must learn what wealth cannot buy: respect, love, and forgiveness. If you chase only the first, you'll lose the others, and when that happens, you'll have nothing left worth keeping." Marcus shifted in his seat, his jaw-tight eyes glistening though he tried to hide it. He stared at the polished surface of the table like he could find a way to climb inside it and disappear. I could almost see the memory forming behind his eyes, the boy who used to sit beside me in church, kicking his feet to the rhythm of the choir, laughing without pretense. Somewhere deep inside him, that boy was still fighting to be heard. Cole set the letter down gently, folding his hands in front of him. "Those were her final words," he said. "She requested they be read aloud only once." The silence that followed was thick, sacred. I sat back, my chest tight, feeling something break loose inside me. It wasn't pain anymore. It was release. My throat ached with it, but no sound came. The tears that fell weren't the kind that blur your vision. They were the kind that clear it. All the years I'd spent replaying arguments, regretting words, wondering if I'd mattered to her. They were gone now, dissolved into the truth of her handwriting. She had seen me. She had understood me. Maybe too late, but sometimes forgiveness doesn't wear a clock. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and trembling. She really wrote that." Cole nodded. "Every word." He laughed once sharp and hollow, then ran a hand over his face. "All my life she told me to be like her, to win, to never settle. I thought that was what she wanted." His voice cracked and the sound cut through me. "And now she's saying I was wrong." "No," I said quietly. "She's saying she was." He looked at me then for the first time that morning, really looked at me. There was no arrogance left. No superiority, just confusion, and something raw underneath it. Grief, maybe. Shame. Maybe both. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You will," I said. "Someday." We sat there in that quiet room, two men bound by the same woman and the same ghosts, not enemies anymore, but not yet reconciled either. It felt like standing at the edge of a river neither of us knew how to cross. Cole cleared his throat, softly, breaking the spell. "There's one last instruction in the will. Mrs. Walker asks that her ashes be divided, half placed beside her parents in Atlanta, and half scattered at the lake property." "The lake," I said under my breath. I could still see it in my mind, the water glittering under the afternoon sun, the wooden dock she used to sit on with her legs dangling, the place we'd promised to grow old together before the world pulled us apart. Marcus frowned. She hated that lake. She never went back after the divorce. "You're wrong," I said. "She just didn't want you to see her there." He didn't answer. Cole gathered the papers, slipped them into the folder, and offered a small nod before leaving us alone. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence returned. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice barely audible. "Why did she do this, Dad? Why give it all to you?" "She didn't give me anything," I said. "She gave it back. Everything she built came from the life we started together. She just remembered who helped lay the first brick." He exhaled slowly, staring at his hands. "I thought I knew her." I nodded. So did I. We sat there until the sun broke through the blinds, slicing gold across the floor. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the world washed clean. I stood smoothing my jacket and looked at him. "Come to the lake tomorrow," I said. "If you want to understand her, that's where you'll find the answer." He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. When I stepped outside, the city felt quieter, the air easier to breathe. People hurried past me, umbrellas tucked under their arms, none of them knowing that my life had just shifted on its axis. I walked to my truck and sat there for a long while holding Ruth's letter in my hands. The ink had smudged slightly as if her own tears had fallen on it once before it reached me. I read her words again. I never stopped loving you, and this time I let myself believe them. The sky was clear now, washed pale blue sunlight breaking through like mercy itself. I turned the key in the ignition and drove toward the highway, the sound of the engine blending with the soft hum of peace rising in my chest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the past was chasing me. It was walking beside me. But as the miles rolled beneath my tires, another thought took shape, quiet but persistent. Ruth had left more than forgiveness behind. She had left a challenge, one final bridge I had to cross. And that bridge waited by the water where her ashes would fall, and her secrets would finally rest. The next morning came quiet and gray, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy enough to remember. I sat on the porch with my coffee, Ruth's letter folded neatly beside me, and watched the fog roll off the lake like breath from a sleeping giant. The world felt still, too still. Birds perched on the fence without singing, the kind of silence that asks you to listen harder. I knew Marcus would come. Pride might delay him, but guilt always has a way of finding directions. When his car finally pulled into the drive, the sound broke the morning like thunder. He stepped out wearing another one of those tailored suits, but this time he didn't look like a man trying to impress anyone. His face was drawn eyes, tired shoulders weighed down with something heavier than grief. I stayed seated, giving him the space to decide whether to come closer. For a long moment he just stood there, staring at the lake as if it might answer the questions he couldn't ask me. "I didn't sleep," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, smaller somehow. I kept reading her letter over and over. "I still don't understand." I nodded, taking a slow sip of coffee. "That's because you're trying to see it through the eyes she raised you with, not the heart she wrote it with." He frowned, walking closer. "She gave you everything, Dad. The company, the money, all of it. And she left me what, a house and a lecture." I set my cup down gently. "She didn't do this to you, son. She did it for you." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "That sounds like something people say to make pain feel poetic." I looked out over the lake. The water was smooth, glassy, reflecting the early light. "Your mother built her world out of ambition," I said. "It gave her everything except peace. She saw you walking down that same road. She wanted to stop you before it swallowed you whole." He crossed his arms. "She could have told me that when she was alive." I turned to him. "Would you have listened?" His silence answered for him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft lap of water against the shore and the creak of the old porch boards beneath my feet. The same boards I'd built with my hands 30 years ago. The same ones Ruth used to sweep barefoot on Sunday mornings. "She loved you, Marcus," I said quietly, even when she didn't know how to show it. "That woman fought the world to make sure you'd never have to beg for respect. But she forgot that real respect isn't bought, it's earned. You can have a company, a house, a name people recognize, but none of it matters if your heart's empty." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just looked at the lake again, his eyes softening as if something in him was loosening too. "I used to think she was cold," I continued. "But she wasn't. She was scared. Scared of losing the life she built, scared of admitting she'd left behind the one that built her." He took a deep breath, then sat down beside me, the wood groaning under our combined weight. For the first time in years we sat side by side without an audience, without the noise of pride filling the space between us. Just a father and his son quiet under the same sky. "Dad," he said finally, his voice low, "why didn't you ever fight back? When she left, when I pushed you away, why didn't you try harder?" I smiled faintly. You can't fight someone into seeing what they're not ready to face. All I could do was wait. Sometimes love isn't about standing in someone's way. It's about standing still until they find their way back. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time since he was a boy, I saw something honest in his eyes. Not guilt, not confusion, just recognition. The realization that the man he'd judged as simple had been quietly carrying a strength he'd never understood. "I don't know if I deserve her forgiveness," he said. "You don't have to deserve it," I told him. "You just have to live like it meant something." A breeze rippled across the water, scattering the reflection of the sky into fragments of light. The sun broke through the clouds in thin gold threads, landing right where Ruth's ashes would be scattered later that afternoon. I took that as a sign. "You'll be the one to do it," I said. "She'd want it that way." He hesitated. "You sure? She carried you longer than she carried me," I said. "Let her rest in her son's hands." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay." When the lawyer arrived with the urn, Marcus took it with both hands, as if it were made of glass and history. We walked down the dock together, each step measured, deliberate. The water lapped gently below, patient and forgiving. He paused at the edge, looking back at me. I nodded once. He unscrewed the lid, his fingers trembling. For a moment he didn't move. Then he whispered something I couldn't hear and tilted the urn. The ashes caught the wind, swirling upward before drifting over the lake, scattering like gray petals across the surface. I closed my eyes, hearing Ruth's laughter in the breeze, soft, distant, but there. When I opened them again, Marcus was still staring out at the horizon. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I feel lighter." "That's what forgiveness does," I said. "Even when it isn't yours." He turned toward me, his eyes glassy but clear. "I think I get it now," he said. "She wasn't trying to take something from me. She was trying to give me back what I'd lost." I nodded. "And what was that?" He smiled weakly. "My heart." We walked back to the house without talking. The silence between us no longer heavy but full, like a song we both knew the words to, but didn't need to sing aloud. When he left later that afternoon, he hugged me, not a polite, distant hug, but the kind a son gives his father when he finally understands where he came from. "I'll be in touch," he said. I believed him this time. After his car disappeared down the road, I sat on the porch again, the sun sinking low behind the trees. The lake shimmered gold, alive with light. I thought of Ruth, of the woman she was, the lessons she left, the love she didn't know how to keep, but somehow returned to me in the end. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like a man left behind. I felt whole. The wind picked up again, soft and warm, carrying with it the faint scent of magnolia and rain. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Ruth." Because she'd given me back more than money or power. She'd given me back my family, my faith, and the quiet knowing that love, no matter how lost, always finds its way home. But even as the evening settled, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ruth's story wasn't entirely over. There was something else waiting, something she'd set in motion long before the ink dried on her will. And whatever it was, I had a feeling it would test everything she'd just helped me heal. When I left the lawyer's office for the last time, the city seemed quieter than it had any right to be. The noise of traffic, the rush of people, even the hum of the crosswalk signal, all of it felt distant, like I was walking inside a memory instead of a moment. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I exhaled without anger sitting in my chest. The sunlight hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, warm and unflinching. The kind of warmth that doesn't burn, it heals. I stopped right there, let it soak into my skin, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." It wasn't about the money. It never was. 33,030 cents, it wouldn't have made a difference. What Ruth gave me wasn't wealth. It was truth. And truth, when it finally catches up to you, has a way of setting the bones straight in places you didn't even know were broken. I walked slow, passing the same coffee shop where Ruth and I used to meet during the early days of her business. I could still see her sitting by the window, notebook open, scribbling dreams into existence. I paused for a moment and smiled. There was no bitterness left, only gratitude. She had fought the world for her vision, and in the end that same fire had led her back to the faith we'd once shared. The streets of Atlanta gleamed with late afternoon light bouncing off car hoods and glass towers. I felt small among them, but not insignificant. For years I'd believed I was the leftover piece in Ruth's puzzle, the quiet man who'd been replaced by success and forgotten by time. But standing there I realized something I should have known all along: sometimes being forgotten is God's way of giving you space to remember yourself. As I crossed the street, a church bell rang in the distance, faint but steady. Its sound carried over the rooftops, and I swear I could hear Ruth's voice in that echo, clear, strong, familiar. She'd always said grace didn't erase mistakes, it turned them into lessons. And now I finally understood what she meant. Grace wasn't something you received once and kept. It was something you lived through, one heartbreak, one choice, one prayer at a time. I found a bench across from the courthouse and sat down, letting the world move without me for a while. People rushed past in every direction: lawyers, secretaries, delivery drivers, all chasing something. I'd spent most of my life chasing too. Chasing peace, chasing understanding, chasing the pieces of a family that no longer fit together. But maybe peace was never something to be chased. Maybe it was what waited for you after you stopped running. I thought of Marcus then, of the way he'd looked standing on the dock, his hands trembling as he scattered Ruth's ashes over the lake. There had been something in his eyes that day, a flicker of humility, of awakening. I prayed that flicker would grow into light. "You'll understand one day, son," I whispered under my breath. "You'll see what she was trying to teach us both." The breeze carried the smell of rain mixed with asphalt and magnolia, that southern perfume that lingers just long enough to remind you where you are. I tilted my head back and watched the clouds move slow and steady across the sky. For once I wasn't thinking about the past or the future, just the now, the sacred quiet now. It struck me then how much this story had never really been about revenge. People love to think it is an old man getting the last laugh, a son learning a hard lesson, a woman righting her wrongs from beyond the grave. But revenge is small. It burns fast and leaves ashes. What Ruth gave us was something bigger. Justice maybe, but not the kind handed out by lawyers or judges. The kind that comes wrapped in grace. The kind that rebuilds instead of destroys. I stood and began to walk again, slower this time, the rhythm of my footsteps syncing with the beating in my chest. I passed a storefront where an old radio played a gospel tune, scratchy and soft. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The words floated through the air like they'd been waiting for me. I smiled, not because of nostalgia, but because it felt like the song was singing me, not the other way around. When I reached my truck, I leaned against the door and looked back at the skyline. Atlanta gleamed under the late sun, tall and proud, just like Ruth. Somewhere up there I imagined her looking down, shaking her head at how slow I'd been to see the whole picture. I chuckled softly. "You always did have to get the last word, didn't you?" I drove home with the windows down, the warm air filling the cab. The road wound past the church, past the old diner where Marcus used to beg for pancakes after Sunday service, past the rows of oak trees, whose branches curved like open arms. Every mile felt like a memory folding back into itself. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood there the same as always, humble, sturdy, waiting. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the light spill across the porch. That house had seen everything. Our laughter, our arguments, our endings, and now maybe our beginning again. I turned off the ignition and let the silence settle. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. I placed Ruth's letter on the mantel beside an old photograph of the three of us, her, me, and a young Marcus grinning with ice cream smeared across his face. Time had faded the colors, but not the warmth. I traced my finger along the frame, whispering, "We made it, Ruth." Not perfectly, but we made it. Later I stepped out onto the porch as the sun sank behind the trees, painting the lake gold. Fireflies blinked in the grass, small lights against the coming dark. I sat in my old chair, the one Ruth used to tease me about keeping, and let the night settle around me. The world didn't feel heavy anymore. Not with regret, not with what-ifs, just with meaning, the kind that doesn't need applause to feel real. I wasn't rich, though my name now sat on documents that said otherwise. What I had was something money could never weigh: a sense of being known. Truly known. I looked up at the sky, the first stars pricking through the dusk, and said it again, softer this time. Thank you, Lord. Because this wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of grace, finding its way home, of love, rediscovered at the edge of loss, of a man finally learning that the truest justice isn't about taking, it's about understanding. And as the night breeze carried the scent of the lake and magnolia, I realized that maybe this wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was God's way of saying the story had only just begun. Life has a way of teaching us the same lessons we once ignored. Isaiah's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in peace, love, and forgiveness. We spend so many years chasing success, approval, or control, forgetting that what really endures are the quiet moments of grace. A son learning humility, a father choosing compassion, a heart finally making peace with its past. It's never too late to forgive, never too late to heal, and never too late to remember who you were before pride got in the way. Time doesn't erase love, it only reveals what's real. If you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or left behind, take this story as a reminder: your worth doesn't fade with age, and your faith still has the power to change lives. Every season of life can bring new redemption if you let it. Subscribe now and share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson from this story touched your heart most? Your story might just inspire someone who needs hope today.